Imagine if we could send information back to ourselves, to warn ourselves of natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, warn loved ones to stay out of situations that might lead to their death. My name is Ronald Mallett, and I believe that I can make time travel a reality.
Let's start with Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton believed that time was like an arrow. Once you fired it, it went in a straight direction. 1 second on the Earth was 1 second on Mars, was 1 second on Jupiter. It never reversed directions. Along comes Einstein, who says, not so fast, not so fast. Time is like a river, old man river, that meanders around stars, speeds up and slows down. The new wrinkle in all this, which is causing all the excitement and the dismay of philosophers, is that this river of time can fork into two rivers. Or perhaps the river of time can have whirlpools and time can go in on itself. In that case, time travel is something you have to take very seriously, because Einstein's equations do allow for time travel. And they're blueprints, blueprints for different kinds of time travel designs that are compatible with Einstein's theory. I believe that the river of time forks into two rivers. If you saw Back to the Future Part 2 very carefully, Doc Brown, this Einstein figure, goes to the blackboard and draws a timeline from the 50s to the 80s. And then he draws a separate line that splits off from the main timeline. The river of time forks into two rivers.
Is this getting to the so-called many-world interpretation of quantum mechanics? Would that be?
That is the simplest way to resolve all these paradoxes.
That never seemed very simple to me.
We cannot find any law of physics preventing you from going backwards in time. It seems to be consistent with the known laws of physics. The trick is, you have to have this energy on the scale of a star. You'd have to be a very advanced civilization. So these tourists from the future are just not 100 years into the future. These tourists from the future would be perhaps millions of years in the future, the ability to control the output of a star. We physicists are hot rodders of physics. We push the equations until they break down. So Stephen Hawking assumed that they would break down. Well, we were shocked. They didn't break down. The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines. This is very unsettling because it means that perhaps, just perhaps, time travel is possible for advanced civilizations. Cannot be ruled out.
What I hope that my father would have said and would have felt is that, Ron, I'm very proud of you, and I'm very proud of what you've done, and I'm very proud of the fact that you hope that it will be used for the betterment of the human race.
Every single one of us has a big story. Events that make us who we are, shape us, inform what we do with our lives, who we become. These big stories are simply extraordinary, defining moments that make or break people. From them we can learn, empathise and connect. These are the turning points that change people's lives. These stories must be told, starting right now.
Professor Ron Mallett is one of the world's leading physicists. His specialty, time travel. He says not only is it possible, he knows how to do it.
My interest in time travel came as a result of a major tragedy that happened in my family when I was very young. I grew up in the Bronx, New York. My father was a television repairman, and for me, I was the oldest of 4 children, and for me, the sun rose and set on him. And he gave me scientific toys like gyroscope and crystal radio set, and he spent a lot of time with me, and I think he eventually wanted me to go into the business with him. Now, he looked very healthy. He looked robust. We didn't know he had a weak heart, and he died suddenly of a massive heart attack when he was only 33. I was 10 at the time, and it completely devastated my life. I went from being a really happy, gregarious kid to becoming depressed, and I really didn't care whether I lived or died after he died. But I did love reading, and about a year after he died, I came across the book that changed my life. It was the Classics Illustrated version of H.G. Wells' classic, The Time Machine. And in it, at the very first page, it said, "Scientific people know very well that time is just a kind of space, and we can move forward and backward in time just as we can in space." And when I saw those words, it was like a life preserver. I thought, wait a minute, if it's possible to go back in time, then maybe if I had a time machine, I could go back to the past and see him again and maybe save his life. So that became a passion for me. I thought that I might be able to put something together that looked like the cover on the magazine that had H.G. Wells' story, The Time Machine. And of course I had bicycle parts and old television parts of my father and everything, and of course it didn't work. But I remembered that it said scientific people know very well. And I knew that I was going to have to know something about science. I wasn't sure exactly what, but I knew it was going to have to be. And the one time I remember, I saw this paperback book, and it had a picture of Einstein on it. Now, I knew Einstein was this great genius. I knew that something was interesting about him from another standpoint because he died in the same year that my father died. He actually died a month earlier, in April of 1955. But I didn't know exactly what he did, but he was standing next to an hourglass. In my mind, I thought, maybe Einstein has something to say about time. So I got the paperback, and even though it was a popular version, I still picked up the essence. The essence is that unlike the old physics of Newton, where the river of time flows and you cannot change it in any way, according to Einstein, there are ways you could alter time. And I thought, wait a minute, if Einstein, this great genius, is saying that there's ways of altering time, then I have to understand what he has to say, because that might lead to the possibility of a time machine. So Einstein became my second passion.
Ron couldn't afford college, so he joined the army. Once he finished serving, he was eligible for subsidised university education. He got his PhD in physics, specialising in Einstein's theory of relativity. For years, he worked on the theory of time travel. And when he had his breakthrough, the world listened.
What I did was I solved Einstein's gravitational field equations for a special type of light, laser light. And my breakthrough was that if gravity can affect time and light can create gravity, then light can affect time. So that what I realized is that laser light could actually alter time. And a special type of laser light, there is a real device that's called a ring laser. It's simply, if you imagine a square and you imagine a corner at each end of the square, the four corners of the square, and imagine bouncing a beam of light from one mirror to the next mirror to the next mirror, so that you create sort of like a circulating beam of laser light. You can imagine that circulating beam of light as being like the spoon, and you can imagine the area that the circulating beam of light is in is like the coffee in the cup. So the circulating light beam will cause a stirring of empty space, just like the spoon causing the stirring of the coffee. This means that anything that's in it will get twisted. If you have enough energy, that twisting of space by the circulating light beam will cause a twisting of time into a loop. So you could create loops in time by using a circulating beam of laser light. And once you have these loops in time, you could potentially travel back into the past. Now, I was interested not in traveling back into the past, but sending information back to the past. In some sense, sending information back to the past is even more important than traveling back to the past. Imagine, for example, catastrophes like earthquakes, tsunamis. If I could send information back to the past to warn myself of that, these things could save thousands of lives, maybe millions of lives. Is this possible? Yes, it is. But how can it be done? Well, part of the problem is that the experiment, I'm a theoretical physicist, I should mention. Einstein was a theoretical physicist. He came up with the famous equation equals mc squared. He did not build nuclear reactors. He was not responsible for the experiments with the atomic energy. He sent a letter to Roosevelt saying the possibility, but was not involved in any experiments. That's done by another area in physics called experimental physics. And I'm not an experimental physicist. I've solved these equations, but to have the equipment to do it, it's just like with the equals mc squared. In order to turn that into real atomic energy requires funding. So The one realistic thing that I should mention is that scientific experiments are very, very expensive. So circulating beam of light experiment has not been done. Mathematically, I've been able to show these effects, but financially, that's something that hasn't yet been done. But it is possible in principle for that to happen. But the limitation is that you cannot have the loop go back earlier than the time the device was turned on. As I said, this happens for any process. For example, if I turned it on today and left it on for, let's say, 10 years, I could send back information 7 years, 5 years, all the way back up to the time that the machine was turned on, but I can't send information earlier than that. What this means is that when time travel does occur, it will have that limitation. We will not be able to visit our ancestors, but our descendants will be able to visit us. And that will allow us, that means that the future of mankind will be able to control their destiny up to the point that it was formed, which is another motivation for trying to create a time machine sooner than later. The decision is for us to make about how much we wish to control our destiny.
On Christmas Eve in the year 1990, up near the North Pole, in a small town known as Dixon, Russia, an experimental device was constructed called the Kozyrev mirrors. The goal of this device was to uncover a theory of time and perhaps access different times in history and the future. At the beginning, one researcher decided to put in the Rorik's peace banner. What happened next was an experience of a strong field, and this field brought with it an intense, irrational fear that overtook everyone who was around it. When they moved further away from the device, the fear dissipated. They then decided to put people inside the device, and when they did, the unimaginable happened. Nikolai Kozyrev began working at the Pulgofo Observatory in 1931. During that time, he was regarded as one of the most promising astrophysicists in Russia. However, during the Stalin purges, he was imprisoned for 10 years. Then in 1941, was given another 10-year sentence. While inside, he was allowed to work in engineering-type jobs. He continued to work purely on theoretical physics. He considered the problem of energy source of stars and formulated a theory. Of course, in his isolation, he was unaware of the discovery of nuclear energy. After his release, Kozyrev refused to believe the theory that stars are powered by nuclear fusion. He was eventually released and then went on to publish a scientific paper on a concept of time. During his sentence, he claimed to have a photographic memory and remembered other scientists' work up to his sentence, like all of the work of Albert Einstein. He theorized based off of the theories of Einstein and gravity warping space-time, depending on what matter was made of. The distortion of space was particular to the combination of matter and mass. He believed that if you could do something similar with time, and with certain physical combinations of matter could warp and distort time. He said, a mirror can be made that can bend absolutely anything, including time. Time travel is possible through a mirror. The basic simplified version of his theory is that time works much like light does, as in, light is a form of energy. He theorized that time was also a form of energy. Much like light, we can only see a fraction of the spectrum, and that we also cannot see the full spectrum of time, i.e., we're limited to seeing the present. A mirror does not reflect light, it bends light and changes its direction. He believed, with the right configuration, could do the same with time. He, through mainly his own funding, ran different tests on different metals and decided the best material to use was aluminum. He also said the configuration that works best is a concave mirror. Concave mirrors can provide us with a visual distortion that bends light to reflect a distorted version of the physical objects in front of it. He designed what can be described as an upright sheet of aluminum bent into a spiral, with enough room for a person to sit inside of it. It would then be rotated clockwise. The concept is that time energy would be gathered by the opening as it rotated, and the person inside would, in theory, exist in multiple spatial times. In 1983, he passed away before he was ever able to build and design testing the device in theory. The cause? Well, that's unknown. After the fall of the Soviet Union, 2 Russian scientists were given funding to build and test this device in the theory. Trofimov and Kozyrev built this device, and based on the results, were out of this world. They transported the device to a small village near the North Pole called Dixon. It was chosen with the idea that the permafrost stores more information from a longer period of time. The ice storing the information of time, and the melting of this ice would release time energy. In the first days this was set up, as described at the beginning of this video, the entire team was overcome with intense fear and a dark, visceral energy that only dissipated when they got further away from the mirrors. There was physical effects. Some of these researchers would feel dizzy. One said they felt a blow to the head. The fear would return as soon as they entered the room and grew as they approached it. When the symbol of peace banner symbol was placed in the mirror, the witness described a dark substance in the room, like a presence that filled the entire room. 2 researchers described how, when one of them realized they forgot their cigarettes in the facility, they decided to go back and get them. When they passed the room with the mirrors, they saw a violet flash, shaped like a tree with branches and roots. It was then they got terrified and ran away from the room. The researchers said that there was a smell of ozone, and that outside the research facility, guards saw a glowing disc object appearing at the very same time as this incident. The guards went on to report that disc-shaped objects appeared over the building about 7 different times during the multi-month period of research. After this first incident, just as mysteriously as the sudden fear, the fear was gone, and they decided to go on with their experiments. When people would enter the mirrors would begin rotating. The people inside would all describe very similar things. They all saw a huge stream of symbols that glowed. The people all saw the same symbols, all separated and had no contact with each other. Many of these symbols can be traced throughout history, in different cultures, many of which the people in the mirror should not have any prior knowledge of. The vast majority of them turned out to be from the ancient Sumerian culture. During these times in the mirror, people described feelings of dread, dizziness, discomfort, and headache. However, over time, many of them endured this and stayed in longer and longer. During these longer spells, some started to report seeing a human shape, a faceless man, all white. He even talked to one of them, warning them of disaster, that our planet was in danger. Some saw themselves at an earlier age, as a child. There were many descriptions of outer body experiences, but the white man kept showing up, always faceless. One saw 2 armies coming together and a volcano erupting. Some saw flying discs, felt sensations of someone watching them, breathe on the neck, extremities being touched by something. 68% of these subjects reported seeing the white faceless entity, feeling like they were being observed, but that it also had control over their mind. Some of them saw periods of their lives, but also events that happened in a distant past. They all felt like what they experienced was real. As reported earlier, there was 7 different sightings of UFOs and flying discs around the village or research facility, moving in the sky and then disappearing, some having beams of lights emitting from them. Probably the strangest thing that people of the town saw was a more intense of the version of the Northern Lights. These lights were actually thousands of multicolored arrows blasting through the atmosphere and heading to the research center. It was reported by over 100 witnesses, and this correlated with an experiment with an artist that was drawing inside the mirrors. During this time, the instruments acted up and some items had to become magnetized. As time went on, the effects of these experiments took a toll on Trofimov and Kozyrev. They were worried about the lasting effects on people who went into the mirrors, many of them claiming to have premonition powers, telepathy, and more eerily the sense that they are being observed. However, they did decide to keep up the experiments. However, Kozyrev eventually grew too disheartened and decided to take a backseat in the year 2000. Trofimov was using these experiments to protect natural disasters up till at least 2018. Now, I stumbled upon this tale very recently and had never heard about it before. And if you're interested in more in-depth take on it, check out the Mr. Mythos video. I'll put the link below. There's not a lot on this topic. There's a video that was produced by Russian state TV called Mirrors that covers this, but almost everything else looks like it's almost scrubbed from the internet. A few Reddit posts that showed very little traction. It seems so little known that I wasn't sure I wanted to make a video on this. I mean, it's not exactly a pull, but I was fascinated by it. On one level, I'm not sure if you've noticed, a lot of different unknown things seem to be popping into existence lately. This doesn't seem like a discovery because there's more information out there. No, the odd part of it is the internet is really shrinking due to censorship and centralization. So it seems doubly odd that things like this seem to almost pop into reality like a merging of timelines. As for this story, well, the experiments all happened over multiple decades. Nothing of substance has seemingly come from them. They're not repeated by anyone and there doesn't seem to be any interest in it. It's talked so limited that there's not even a big mockery campaign against it. But it does touch on a few things that seem to correlate to other types of experiences that people have in terms of out-of-body experiences, psychedelic experiences where they see strange things and entities, and other government-funded ESP and telepathy experiments. So it's hard to dismiss outright as being completely bunk. While you could say these are just hallucinations and mass hypnosis, there's something to be said with the similarities between other forms of conscious expansion. Does the mirrors itself bend time? It's hard to say. Modern theoretical physicists claim that there might be up to 11 dimensions of time, and we can't fully be sure of how time works or functions. This part of reality is still up for debate. I do believe that there may be ways to perceive of things that we can't normally perceive of with our sensory experience. There is mystery in everything, and that's what I'm interested in. So I like to keep an open mind. Perhaps there's something here that we just can't understand. If reality is an illusion, then there must be a way to break it. Okay, so what do you think? Tell me in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to help this channel grow. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.